Thank you. We'll come to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And before we dive into the agenda, I just want to, as always, start by acknowledging that we're meeting today on the unceded land of the hereditary land of the Algonquin people. Also, I wanted to invite the committee to send our best wishes to David Yurtiga. He's home in Fort McMurray since Tuesday, dealing with a very difficult situation there. And of course, all of our best wishes are with him. There are two issues on the agenda today. I propose that we deal with them together. The first is the main estimates, and the second is the report on plans and priorities. And to speak with us about those issues are the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, the Honourable Carolyn Bennett, and Hélène Larondeau, the Deputy Minister of INAN, and Paul Topple, the CFO. Thank you all for coming today. And again, committee members, I just want to go over my proposed order for model for the meeting today. I'd like to invite the minister and her colleagues to have 15 minutes to present what they need to get through. They advised me that they probably only need about 12 minutes, so we'll probably finish that a little bit early. Then we have I've created a list with the clerk of one speaking order that should take about 51 minutes. That'll take us, I think, by the time we do all that and get through the voting, we should finish around 5 or so. Now, I propose that only as long as every committee member is okay with only going through one order of questions. And I had some assent from some members earlier before we sat down, but does that seem reasonable? Kathy?
I didn't think it was one order. I thought it was to just continue to roll the questions, like to go back to the top as it was not to go back to the start at 1 hour was the intention, but certainly if we have the minister, and of course she's been very gracious with her time, and I would certainly hate to waste any minutes if she has them to spare.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? We have the votes to get to toward the end of the meeting, so let's check in after what the time is after we get through the first round of questions, and we'll fit a few more in if there's time, and still leaving time for the votes. Okay? All right. Thank you for that. Well, without further ado, Minister Bennett, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too, before we begin, want to offer our condolences and support to the residents of Fort McMurray and the surrounding areas as we're dealing with this absolutely devastating tragedy. I was able to speak to 3 chiefs last evening. Quite amazing to hear from Fort McKay how they're actually receiving people from other areas, and this is something that, you know, I think this committee also will be very engaged in, and I too note the absence of, as the member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, Mr. Yurtiga, and you know, and I think we all believe he's in the right place, being back helping with the people in his community, and I think this is a heartbreaking disaster, and it is what members of Parliament do. So I hope that you'll convey to him if there's anything that we can do to help, or anything he hears on the ground that our department can help with, that we would very much like that direct contact if that's possible. It's a pleasure to be back here at your committee, here on acknowledging the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. And aujourd'hui, je suis en campagne.
Today I am joined by our new Deputy Minister, Hélène Larondeau, and our Chief Financial Officer, Paul Topple.
And they promised to take all the tough questions. So I think, you know, as somebody who believes the role of committees is hugely important, that we want to make sure that that we believe in the role that you play, the fundamental role in the parliamentary process, and the really important role there is in holding government to account. That is the role of all parliamentarians from all parties, and we take your job very seriously, and je veux collaborer avec vous pour
I want to work with you to ensure that you have the information you need, all the information to do that crucial work.
We want you to know if there's anything that we weren't able to answer today, we will get back to you. I think we've been doing that reasonably well. I need to know that if there's any information you need that I don't have, we'll get it for you. And but I also think this is an opportunity for all of us to recognize the people who are watching carefully at home, who care about the work of this committee. And it's an opportunity for all of us to use this as an example of how government works, how parliamentary committees do hold governments to account. And I think that as we see this collision today of plans and priorities, main estimates, budget 2016, today is going to be quite an interesting exercise on how we do that when all that comes together. And I think you know that because we're doing main estimates, but right in together with the budget 2016, there's some confusion as to what main estimates really mean. And I just wanted to explain that the estimates, I think, as most of you know, are the total of all funding that's already been approved by Treasury Board. So that's a separate checks and balance that the President of the Treasury Board puts in place. These are never an estimate of the total spending for the year. It's just of what's already been approved. And so as Treasury Board approves new funding or renews existing programs, we come back to Parliament and to commit, and I to this committee through the supplementary estimates process, and that is means that there is this sometimes understanding is something we hadn't thought of yet, but it actually is just things that haven't yet had the detail necessary to get the Treasury Board approval. So as we know, there's also a disconnect in the sequence between main estimates, reports on plans and priorities, and the budget. And I think we all know that this system is archaic and unclear, and it's why the President of the Treasury Board has committed to modernize the estimates process to ensure that Parliament has timely and accurate information. So, as you've all read, our main estimates total about $7.5 billion in spending, and that the estimates reflect a net decrease of about $726.3 million, which may alarm some, but I'm here to reassure you that the vast majority of these decreases relate to the targeted initiatives that have either had funding reprofiled to future years or has had funding replaced by new funding in budget 2016. So, je suis heureuse que nous ayons aujourd'hui l'occasion.
I'm happy that today we will have this opportunity to discuss the main estimates and report on planning and priorities with the added context of budget 2016.
Budget 2016, we're committed to ensuring equality of opportunity for Indigenous peoples and that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis youth, wherever they live in Canada, have hope. So you have heard many times, the budget 2016 makes historic investments in Indigenous peoples, totaling $8.4 billion over 5 years. We've been very pleased that the leadership, National Chief Perry Bellegarde, has said this budget invests in important priorities for First Nations and all Canadians. Investments in housing, clean water, education, and child welfare will bring long-needed relief for those living in third world conditions and build a stronger economy for everyone. But we know that this budget is only a start. Beyond new investments in 2016, we're working in full partnership with First Nations to establish a new fiscal relationship, one that gives their communities sufficient, predictable, and sustained funding. This is to be a new relationship that means that people and First Nations have the opportunity to plan, as other communities have the ability to plan, as the chair knows all so well. Bien que le temps ne
While there is not time to outline all of the investments that are proposed in Budget 2016 for Indigenous peoples, I would like to highlight some key initiatives.
is always been on the top of everybody's mind in terms of the way out, and we know that closing the gaps in First Nations education outcomes is critical, and we know that we must be held accountable for the results. That numerous reports, including from the Auditor General, have confirmed that chronic underfunding of First Nations education systems has held First Nations students back. Budget 2016 contains transformational funding totaling $2.6 billion over 5 years in K-12 education. We are focused on investments on programs that will improve the literacy and numeracy rates, build and improve schools and classrooms, and better support the integrating language and culture into First Nations education, which we know is the way to success. Je veux dire très clairement que nous respectons.
I want to make it absolutely clear that we will respect First Nations control over First Nations education, and we will never act unilaterally in this issue.
As a partner to ensure the goals set by First Nations are achieved and to support First Nations-led. Le gouvernement s'est aussi engagé à promouvoir.
The government has also committed to advance and achieve reconciliation with the Métis Nation based on rights recognition, partnership, and a renewed nation-to-nation relationship.
National Council President Chartier recently said the Trudeau government has already recognized the Métis Nation and is prepared to deal with us on a nation-to-nation basis. As a first step, in recognition of the entrepreneurial spirit of Métis in Canada, Budget 2016 proposes $25 million over 5 years to support economic development for the Métis Nation. We all know that we have to increase the proactive support for Indigenous children and their families, keep more children out of foster care, and support them growing up with a secure personal cultural identity. Child and Family Services on Reserve must be overhauled, and we are committed to working with Dr. Cindy Blackstock, the Assembly of First Nations, provinces and territories to fix it. As a start, we will provide nearly $635 million over 5 years, in addition to funding the First Nations and Child and Family Services program. This will allow us to respond to Indigenous calls to expand the previous pilots of enhanced prevention, which focused approach to First Nations Child and Family Services on reserve, to now to be able to be provided to all provinces and territories. We will also work in partnership with provinces, territories, and Indigenous communities, and the Ministry of Health to ensure Jordan's principle is expanded and applied in a way that always puts the health and well-being of children first. Every family, every child deserves access to clean water. Budget 2016 provides $2.24 billion to First Nations communities to improve on-reserve water infrastructure and waste management. These funding will support our commitment to put an end to long-term boil water advisories on reserve within 5 years. Le logement est aussi un besoin essentiel.
Housing is also a fundamental need, and all Canadians should have access to a secure home.
Budget 2016 provides $554.3 million over 2 years beginning this year. The need for affordable housing is also particularly high in the North and in Inuit communities, and we heard clearly from the Indigenous members of Parliament that focused only on housing on reserve was not going to serve their needs, and that there needed to be a separate allocation for the North and Inuit communities. As pointed out by Nathan Obed, the president of ITK, the $170 million earmarked in the budget for building affordable housing in Inuit Nunangat is welcome, given the severity of crowding in our 4 regions, and I look forward to working with the government to find ways to achieve the much larger investment that is necessary. L'insécurité alimentaire est aussi un problème.
Food insecurity is also particularly acute in northern communities.
To update and expand the Nutrition North program to ensure Northerners can feed their families and have better access to country foods. As a first step, Budget 2016 provides $64.5 million over 5 years and $13.8 million per year ongoing to expand Nutrition North Canada to support all northern isolated communities. The government believes that the historic $8.4 billion in investments in Indigenous communities through Budget 2016 on their priorities will improve living conditions and social and economic outcomes. But I also want to make the point that many other investments in this budget beyond this $8.4 billion will have a profound positive impact on the lives of Indigenous people in Canada. From the newer, fairer, tax-free Canada Child Benefit to increasing the Northern Residents Deduction to enhancing Canada's student grants, these and other measures will benefit all Canadians, including Indigenous people in Canada. Last June, Gwich'in Elder Ray Jones said on the morning of the final ceremony for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Shed dim ama ga'u dingu mel. It means in Gitchin, the canoe must be uprighted. I believe that Budget 2016 is an important first step to uprighting the canoe and to true reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I just wanted to ask, did you have remarks also about the report on plans and priorities? And did you want to do those separately after we dispense with this?
I think we felt that it's just moot
Okay.
based on Budget 2016, and I think that's what the President of the Treasury Board is trying to sort out.
Okay, very good. Well, in that case, we'll move right into our first round of 7-minute questions, and as always, I'll hold up a yellow card when there's 1 minute left and a red card when I'm asking you to sort of finish up, and we'll move on to the next questioner. The first question comes from Mike Blasio, please.
Thank you so much, Minister, for being here today. And as I will echo Kathy's words, that it's great that you're availing yourself of so much of your schedule to come to our committee. We greatly appreciate it. And I've spoken to you about this before on the whole funding issue around First Nations. Now, you'd mentioned that the $7.5 billion, that the $8.4 billion over 5 years was going to offset the shortfall from going from the $6 billion to 7.5 billion. So of that 8.4 billion, do you have a time frame as to how that's going to be allocated over each of the 5 years, and just how much of that lost whatever it was 726 million is going to be given back through that large sum?
You know, I think if you go actually to the main estimates, you'll see there are a number, like for example, there are a number of things that the specific and comprehensive claims, Indian residential schools, federal contaminated sites, water and wastewater, those have brackets around them, so those look like they're less. If you then compare that with what's in Budget 2016, that you can see that those actually are augmented because of that anticipated funding. There are some things that go down because they are winding down. So the Indian residential school settlement, that as more and more people have been paid, we need less and less of a secretariat to do that work, and so that one is definitely sort of on its way down. On the specific and comprehensive claims, that is always just an estimate that gets booked based on how many claims you think you're going to settle. If they're not settled, then they get moved into the following year and reprofiled. But the department's not lost the money. We just didn't spend it this year. And on contaminated sites, waste and water and wastewater, what's in budget 26 more than 2016 more than makes up for what it looks like a decrease in the main estimates.
Thank you so much, Minister. So I want to get to the brunt then of my questioning around funding. As everyone knows, I've put forward a motion, or will be tabling a motion to look at specifically at funding, because I really do see it as one of the key short-term things that we can try to deal with to lead towards more self-determination and self-government. Because under the grant process today, it really is a very short, narrow window of funding that is very specifically geared to a particular area. And to me, once again, it's that whole paternalistic notion that, okay, we know how best you can spend your money, rather than Indigenous communities setting their own priorities. So if we can, my own personal view is, if we can change the grant structure so it's operational, so that it moves more towards self-determination, then it also gives that responsibility of establishing priorities, which then leads to accountability, which then leads to truly a nation-to-nation relationship. Because as long as they're beholden to us for the purse strings, how do you have a nation-to-nation relationship? And I point to, today we had a group in our Environment Committee, the Lutselk'e Dene First Nation that has established the Tai Dene Nene Park up in Northwest Territories. And one of the key factors of them reaching this, or almost being very close to reaching this agreement, was the trust fund that was set up that gave them very long-term secure funding, so that they had the trust, and they had, and based on that trust, were able to build that relationship. And so I kind of it just set that, once again, reconfirm my whole view of that. And I just want you to now kind of speak to that is the department looking in the same direction, that we've got to really start looking at the whole funding mechanism to lead towards self-determination and self-government.
Well, I couldn't agree more. The commitment to sufficient, predictable, sustained funding is there, but it means changing the fiscal relationship. And in some ways, what you're describing is even worse, in that some of the communities received notice on, March 1st. They've got to have the money spent by March 31st, and it's only an annual grant. I mean, that nobody can plan. We couldn't plan our families that way. And so by having, as you say, sufficient predictable funding to move it more into a transfer, which is the objective of moving to a self-governing body where they can actually know what's coming in long term. But it also allows them access to capital to be able to borrow. If people know that there's money coming in a regular way, it's not this red light, green light, will the money be there next year, or those. So yeah, absolutely, that sitting down and working is how we can change this from this very linear approach of just grants and contributions into a more mature nation-to-nation relationship, I think, is the goal of everyone.
No, I see that, in some respects, the department has been trying to move in this direction. I guess my concern is how do we accelerate it? Right. So how do we accelerate it so that once again, I mean, everybody's always concerned that, if we do that, are they going to know how to manage it and everything else? Well, we've been setting up our own system of governance since the 1400s, so we've had plenty of time to be able to figure these things out. We need to give them the opportunity to figure these things out for themselves. And guess what? They're going to make mistakes in doing that. But if we truly do want to back off from this whole paternalistic notion that we know what's best, the only way we can do that is by giving them that responsibility and allowing them to set their own priorities. So do you see a way forward to accelerate this process?
Yes. Mike, you've taken us to 7 minutes there.
Yeah. So I think I think that if you look to the First Nations Fiscal Management Act and the kinds of tools that were put in place that then set up various institutions that allow that, and I think, over almost 200 First Nations are now certified in that way, and that there's a way of incenting building capacity, such that people don't have to play red light, green light with our department anymore, and that they can actually count on this. And I think that's what's the exciting future as to how we go forward, building that capacity.
Speaking of
and
red
as
light,
the Minister
Minister,
of Justice says, we want more and more communities to be ready, willing, and able to get out from under the Indian Act.
Thank you. Kathy, please.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you to the Minister. And, I do want to acknowledge when I first came to Parliament, and I came from a background of local government and healthcare where there was, a budget set, and that's what you dealt with for the year, and you had, perhaps a contingency fund. So this whole very circuitous way of planning and spending money was a little bit of a mind boggler when I first arrived. So, I do appreciate that we need to make things a little bit more fine-tuned. So certainly the Prime Minister and yourself have indicated that implementation of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are of critical importance. The Prime Minister committed to all 94. So I do have a few questions in that area. And first of all, of course, this week on Tuesday, we heard from the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, and they said they had no idea about their budget, what they were getting. So, certainly to leave, I think they were, number 74 commitment, they're up and going, and all of a sudden they're completely in the lurch in terms of the commitment to that organization. So could you perhaps maybe relieve them and relieve us that that one is progressing?
No, I agree, and I think that I believe that we were pleased to be able to give the Centre a little bit of money at the end of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for them to continue their work. But I think it's going to be very important that we sit down and again work with them on their work plan and the kind of work that we know needs to be done. On other recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think in the little deck we gave you, we've sorted, we've analyzed who does what, and there's certain ones that have been picked up by the provinces and territories, like the curricula for education. The universities have picked up theirs, and so our job is to drive that effort across all government departments and all jurisdictions, municipalities, private sector, but for us to feel that we are really helping get this done, even though we don't have to pay for all of them.
Thank you, Minister. And I have in the House have sort of looked for the production of papers. I have noticed that you say that you want us to have the information you need to do the crucial work. I think consistently understanding the 94 recommendations, I see that 45 are designated towards federal government purely, but I don't get a sense of sort of any depth or framework or costing or analysis. So hopefully any work that has been done by you and your department, you would be willing to table with this committee.
Yes, I mean the work is early in terms of because I think that Kathy, the work of reconciliation is bigger than just the 84 recommendations. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out of a class action suit, and as Charlie knows well, there were people left out of that, and so we're going to have to develop a plan for the reconciliation framework that includes all Canadians, and not just those that were in that class action. And so I think as we work with cabinet colleagues to develop the full reconciliation framework, that's going to be an exciting opportunity for us to develop the kinds of work plan of what, by, when, and how on each of these, and cost it out and figure out how do we get this done, this unfinished work of Confederation.
So I guess certainly when you commit to sort of the 94 recommendations, I would think there's been some substantial work done already in terms of what the implications and the costs. Is that not accurate?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that I'm happy to share with you what's been done to date, but I think that I'm just saying that in terms of us organizing this across whole of government, it's really important that we are working with all of our cabinet colleagues, but also the provinces and territories and the municipalities, and that's why in June, when I meet with the Aboriginal Affairs working group of my counterparts in the provinces and territories, that these are the kinds of things that we're working on every day. And there's some easy things that we know, like the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That money's been booked, and all of the work that we're doing on the things that are there: education, health, child welfare, language and culture. A lot of those things are in this budget, but as you know, we know it's a first step, and full reconciliation won't be accomplished with this 8.4, but we will begin our way down the path.
So I think, so that makes sense. I mean, you have 94 recommendations and you gave an example. So that kind of chart would be very helpful for us as a committee to sort of see what's happening. How's my time? So I would appreciate any of the work that you've done around as I say, the calls to action and how they're moving forward. If you were willing to share, that would be very helpful.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both. The next question comes from Charlie Angus. Charlie, please.
Thank you, Madam Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here. The last time we spoke on these issues was in a plane on the James Bay lowlands, but we don't have a 2-hour flight, so I only have 7 minutes. So you'll excuse me if I may seem
It's a bit bigger
curt.
than the King Air.
Yeah, but I just, there's so many, I could ask questions for days on these issues, as you well know. You'd said about the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement sunsetting, I believe it's this year. When does it officially sunset?
I understand, it says each of the cases gets resolved, then that is within that settlement. So, there are only a few. So maybe, how many do we only have, we're targeting 2020 in order to have it all done.
2020. Okay, has the Indian Residential School Resolution Health Support Program already been sunsetted? Because I can't seem to find it anywhere.
The
mental health support that was in the Indian Residential School Health Support Program, has it been sunsetted?
Okay. Let's just, was that, let me just check.
The main estimate identified that residential school has sunset, but it's planned to be renewed until 2020 to finish all the work that needs to be done on the IAP, and including the support until the end.
Okay, that's good to know. So we have survivors going to court on Wednesday where their evidence was suppressed by the Justice Department, as you well know, in the St. Anne's case, and they are going to have their case reopened, which would be certainly a milestone in the IEP. We have 1,000 cases in the administrative split that seem to have been unfairly adjudicated. Are they part of the numbers of what you're looking at? You said you had a few cases that still had to be, or are you going to, is the government going to continue to oppose these cases in court, or is there a settlement process?
Our working with the Minister of Justice, we want to see as many of these cases out of court as soon as we can. This is really hard on people, and I think that we're close in the case in Newfoundland, Labrador. I think that we're getting there. In that harm was done. We have to sort this out.
Well, I appreciate that. I would urge you to meet with Rebecca Friday and Edmund Matatawaban, because the trauma in those communities are directly linked into what's happening to these cases. If we can get this out of the judicial system, we would go a long way. So I appreciate that. In the child welfare decision and the Human Rights Tribunal ruling, it was pretty damning last week, and they raised the question about the insufficient funds. Now you have 126 million starting this year, but by year 5 we still haven't reached the 200 million. And Cindy Blackstock says it's got to be 200 million now. So the Human Rights Tribunal has called on the government and it's called on your department. No offense, but it seems to be under sort of third-party management. They're wanting plans and priorities and stuff, which I think is kind of it's a helpful thing. So how are we going to get that shortfall dealt with?
Well, I think we had a very good meeting with Dr. Blackstock and the AFN last week. I think that there are some programs in her estimates that I think are quite good and that we will consider. The money that we put in the budget was the money that was absolutely necessary to make it fair across the country. In the enhanced prevention dollars were pilots, and they weren't in BC, Yukon, parts of Ontario, New Brunswick, or Newfoundland. So what we chose to do was to put those enhanced prevention dollars right across the country as we work on changing the system. And so we are looking very, we know the system has to be overhauled, and we're working with the AFN and Dr. Blackstock to put that advisory committee back together that will advise us on the reforms, and then we will get the money as it's required to be able to fund a better system that will wrap services around kids and keep them with their families and their cultures and be able to as you know, Charlie, there's more kids in foster care now than at the height of residential schools. It's a disgrace, and it's got to stop.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the things that the tribunal has said, though, is that action has to happen now, because this has been 9 years of fighting in the tribunal, so we're going to have to see that moved up. Now, I just want to ask you a few questions about estimates and mains. I have to admit, I only got 52% in grade 10 math, so I'm always challenged in these basic things. So I'm looking at Nutrition North, and I'm hearing that you're putting in $13 million a year in the program. That sounds great, but then when I look at the estimates and what was put in the supplementals, there was $68.5 million last year, but now it's down to $54 million this year. So it reads to me like a cut in the nature of $1.5 million. Now, I don't want to do that twice because I'll probably trip on my numbers, but can you explain to me, like, it seems like we've cut the program and then we're adding money in, but it doesn't add up to what was there last year.
So I got 97 in grade 13 math, and I asked exactly the same question. So I think, I don't think your teacher was fair, Charlie, because this is important. So what this doesn't show is that there is 18 million that's sitting there, and the money that you see there as the 10.2 is actually money added on to what's there to run the program. So there's 18 that is there but isn't approved by Treasury, hasn't got through the Treasury Board process yet, so we'll be back in SUPs. And then the 10.2 is for the additional communities.
Okay, so then very quickly, the Prime Minister, when he was running for the job, promised $50 million in post-secondary, but I don't see any in the budget. So what happened to that money?
Post-secondary?
$50 million in additional spending a year, but I didn't see any in the budget.
Yeah, well, post-secondary again the assets money is in Minister Mahaichuk's budget. Post-secondary, we are really needing to sit down with First Nations and sort out the best way to go forward. As you know, the money for grants in the budget was doubled, and so we are very interested in eliminating the wait lists in all the First Nations by trying to get those kids to qualify for those grants. There's
Thanks,
tons
Minister.
of money in that other budget, and we want to be able to shape the program so that First Nations kids can apply and get on to school.
Okay, thank you both. The next question comes from Michael McLeod, please.
I'll say thank you to the Minister and her staff for the presentation today. Very interesting process, this budget process that we've are reviewing. I do want to, first of all, say thank you to the Minister for all the hard work and effort on the files, the many files that are in this department. We're starting to see some movement in many areas. I think we're in deadlock for many years, and I really appreciate all the effort that's being put into some of these difficult challenges. Although, having said that, every time we seem to scratch the surface on an issue, we uncover a whole bunch of other things that we have to work towards. We have done lots with this department, but there's lots to do. I noticed that out of the $726 million that was going to be decreased, 403 of that was in the area of claims and specific claims. I'm assuming that was a little bit ambitious if that was targeted to be spent in the year that it was allocated for. I'm assuming we're going to see it come back in the subs, or we're going to carry it over. But what I'm really wanting to hear is that claims, comprehensive claims, specific claims are a high priority for this department, and we're going to budget even more than this, and we're going to try to resolve a couple of the big ones in the Northwest Territories.
Well, I thank the member for all your hard work, in that I think that you know, your deep understanding of how important claims are, and how we really do have to move these things along, almost to Mike Bossio's point about how you get stable funding and just a certainty around being able to plan your life. So, as you know, we are very excited about the Treaties and Aboriginal Government part of our department, led by this amazing Joe Wild, who is really mandated to take creative, innovative approaches to get these things done. And it is going to be with creativity and innovation that this happens, in that even in the BC process, some people don't want a full treaty. They want something a little short of a treaty. So to go out and ask people what it is they need, and for us to try and help them get it, that is the way forward, so we can end up with a final agreement that is good for the First Nation and exactly what they know they need.
Thank you. I'm hoping that we're going to see some resolution to some of the claims that are outstanding in the North. I'd certainly offer any assistance I can. In the budget, you also mentioned that there's $25 million for Métis through the Métis National Council. Now, not everybody belongs to the Métis National Council. I'm Métis, and I don't belong to Métis National Council. I have a lot of relatives that are in Northwest Territories that are Métis. There is a population there that doesn't belong to the Métis National Council, and there's some members that do. How can we be reassured that there is going to be money for the Métis in the Northwest Territories?
That's an excellent question, and because it's part of the Métis economic development strategy for the Métis Nation, I think that they've had I think it's Métis communities and Métis financial institutions that is setting up the ability for entrepreneurs and businesses to tap into for economic development. So we can get back to as to how that would apply in the Northwest Territories, but it's, you know, it is a success story, as you know, with Métis really you know, across Canada.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but however, I have some concerns. We are left out in Northwest Territories. There's $8.4 billion earmarked for Aboriginal programs, Indigenous programs. The North is going to get very little of that. We do not fall under the category of Indigenous affairs responsibilities, even though we have 50% of our population that's Indigenous. How is there a way in this budget? And you said it's the system is unclear, archaic. How do I carve out what is going to the Northwest Territories out of your budget? How do I know? How can I tell the people in my riding that are Aboriginal that they're getting treated fair? There is no earmarked money really, unless there's a carve out for housing. And I want to say it's the first time we've had housing investment in many, many years, and we really appreciate it. But there is a real responsibility on my part, and I think on this government's part to be able to reassure the people in the Northwest Territories that they are getting fair funding. The studies show that it's not happening that way.
So it works in a couple of ways, as you know, that there's the transfer to the territory, and then that money is is negotiated with the territory on certain aspects. If you take housing, for example, the Northwest Territories itself was given 12 million, but then there was also the 15 million over 2 years to the Inuit settlement region, and so to the Inuit. In that, as you know, some of the Inuit housing situations are really disastrous.
I have a question before we end. Why is the review happening with the Friendship Center? If you could just tell me that. Why is it needed?
Why is there a review? Over the past 2 years, the whole of the urban Aboriginal strategy was delivered through the National Association of Friendship Centers. There have been some concerns in terms of urban Inuit, urban Métis, that youth, that they wanted more of a collaborative approach to where that money goes into communities. So the Friendship Centers will get exactly the same amount of money for this year coming up, but we do believe we need a review. In that, I did a roundtable on urban Aboriginal on Friday in Montreal, and there's all these organizations. They've been put into a competitive atmosphere instead of collaborative, and we want to know how we could do this better.
Thank you. We'll move now into the 5-minute questions, and the next question comes from Arnold Viersen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the Minister for being here today. I'll add my voice to the chorus of thank you for your time here today. One of the, Charlie already talked about this to some degree, about the apparent cuts to the funding for post-secondary education. What was interesting as well is that the number of full-time employees seems to have been reduced as well. I was wondering if you could just address that a little bit as well.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you? It's better. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak up. Not a problem. Charlie addressed the apparent drop in funding for the post-secondary education. I was just wondering if you could address the reduction of the full-time employees from 19 to 17 as well.
So sorry.
So the human resources have been reduced as well on the post-secondary side. We were just looking at it. Post-secondary education, page 29, is now 17 full-time employees. It's a significant reduction in full-time employees on that. I was just wondering if you could address that.
Deputy can.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure where you're seeing that. You said which page?
29. So when we compared it to the last budget, it's a significant reduction in numbers.
I would have to check into that. I cannot give you an answer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Access to safe drinking water and effective treatment of wastewater is critical to the health and safety of our First Nations peoples. One of your government's promises was to ensure clean water availability on 93 communities on reserve currently affected by poor water quality. In your plan to ensure clean water availability, has your department developed and implemented any of the regulatory components of that?
At the moment, the regulatory has to be in collaboration with the provinces and territories. That the Safe Drinking Water Act caused some consternation in certain communities, like say Akwesasne, that's in Ontario, Quebec, and the U.S. So how do you? So as we go forward, the regulatory piece is one thing, the infrastructure is another, but training is huge in terms of you can build all the plants, but if you don't have people who can run them and who won't be poached to the local town to run theirs, and I think that's why we have to work in regions to figure out how we do this collaboratively both on the regulatory side, but also infrastructure and training.
Thank you. Under the previous government, we spent nearly $400 million per year on the water and wastewater. This under budget 2016, the government announced a $360 million annual funding for clean water on reserve. Why the decrease in this wastewater funding?
The increases?
Decrease.
Oh yeah, that was again in my what looks like a decrease there. If you go to what's added in budget 2016, actually ends up for 2016-17 294.8, so that more than makes up for the 137.3 that looks like a decrease.
Okay, thank you. Minister Bennett, I was pleased to see a strong endorsement for financial transparency and accountability in the report for plans and priorities. The report states transparent and accountable institutions and organizations strengthen the fabric of Indigenous governments across Canada, assisting Indigenous communities and their governments in attracting investment and supporting Indigenous participation in the Canadian economy. If this is the case, why did you instruct your department to stop enforcing the First Nations Transparency Act? It seems counterproductive.
Thanks for the question. All First Nations have to submit audited statements to our department, and the practice is that they all share those statements with their members in their communities. If any member has trouble getting that information, that they can approach our office. The problem with the way the previous bill was written is that it included businesses that were band operated, and that led to the potential of predatory practices from competitors to actually know how much you're paying your engineer or all of those things. So we in the Kelowna Court, there was a First Nations Auditor General. I think that everybody wants to work on better approaches to transparency and accountability, and through the First Nations Financial Management Board and other institutions, I think we're moving well on
Thank you.
ensuring the transparency and accountability.
I'm also a little bit alarmed by the target of 75% compliance for First Nation communities. Our government had aimed for 100% compliance, and we had a compliance rate of over 90%. So could you just comment on why the lowering of the target when actual compliance was higher than your target?
Yeah, maybe. The target was the same. The achievement was above the target last year, you're quite right, and we expect that the achievement will be the same this year, or roughly the same. The target was set in such a way that it got exceeded.
Okay. I have 14 First Nations in my riding, and I've made it my task to visit all of them. I meet with several of the band leaders, but I also generally drive around the reserves and talk to anybody who happens to be there that's interested in talking with me. And one of the things that I ask about is our Transparency Act and was that effective? And the thing that I say, well, I give your example, anybody that's interested in these things is able to get them. And they say, well, that's an interesting, but on the ground, it's a completely different story. If you ask for the information, the band council holds a great deal of power over your life, and things will happen in your own life just for asking the wrong question. So I was just wondering if you're aware of this situation or not.
I have heard the odd anecdote that reflects that practice, but I think coast to coast to coast where I've been, that First Nations have posted their statements on a website that's just password protected for their members. I think there are always outliers on these in these sorts of situations, but these are democratically elected chief and council, and if people don't like their practices, they can vote them out.
Thank you both very much for that. Next question from Don Rusnak, please. 5 minutes.
How many minutes?
5.
Oh, I forgot. Thank you for coming, Minister. Myself and Mr. Andasangari recently had a tour of a couple First Nations in my riding. While we were there, we heard of problems with the drinking water systems in their community. Some of the problems have been related to the equipment that was provided. I guess I don't know how old the equipment is, but a lot of it was outdated when it arrived. So I know Lac La Croix has had to get part of the equipment from the Czech Republic, and it was old equipment that they were buying just to keep their system running. So is there anything that the department is doing in terms of procurement, in terms of water systems, to make sure that they're the best systems and not substandard systems that are being delivered to First Nations?
Absolutely, Don, and we are really interested in listening to some of the engineers and experts. Technical Advisory Committee I met with in Alberta 2 weeks ago. I think the Technical Advisory Committee for Ontario is meeting soon from Chiefs of Ontario. Everybody knows we've got to get away from this vendor-driven approach. That there have been many well-known stories of people being sold something that just isn't going to work for them, either because it doesn't work and it's antiquated, or because it's way more than they need. And requires a level 3 operator who will be immediately poached to the local town, and then they've got no one to run the plant for them. And so we think that for that technical expertise to be shared amongst First Nations is the way forward, almost in a public utilities technical advisory approach that is that again gets away from our department doing red light, green light on these. That this has got to be a way that we could move forward to make sure people get exactly the piece of equipment that will work, but also training up their people such that it's sustainable, and that the water quality is what people need.
In your statement to the committee, you mentioned that Budget 2016 provides $2.24 billion to First Nations to improve on-reserve water infrastructure and waste management. So is that amount over 5 years, or is it immediately?
It's over 5. Yeah. It's
over the 5 years.
Yeah.
And with that total amount, is it broken up for purely just infrastructure, or is that also expected? Is that amount expected to be used for training operators and training people in the community to run these systems?
Yes. Again, that's the package that the piece of equipment won't work on its own. But I think that there are other people that there are training centers that people access in different ways. The excellent program in Dryden and others where young people decide being a water operator is a good thing to want to do. So I think it's exciting to see that people will find these technical jobs that really help their communities.
Getting back to the $2.24 billion and the program from, and I'll get the name wrong, but the program where they're training, yes, to run.
1 minute left.
The young man right out of high school who went straight into running his community's water treatment system, an excellent program. I've seen or heard and seen other programs across the country where municipalities actually partner up with the First Nation to help train the First Nation operators, and partnerships like those are amazing. I'd like to see that
go
continue.
through a plant with one of those kids or young people who's just been hired. I mean, the pride of to see just how proud, and whether they're talking about E. coli or emergency management, these are proud citizens that are helping their people. It's great.
So,
Don, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, man. We're out of time. We're going to move right along to the next question from Todd Doherty, please.
Thanks, Minister, for being here today. You've been very generous with your time, and I'm going to apologize right out from the start. I am fairly frustrated, and I'm getting a little tired of some of the, I guess, the rhetoric that we're seeing. Great question from our honourable colleague from Northwest Territories regarding Métis. I think it's very important that we're doing everything in our power. I'm not quite sure that, and I've said this before, all the hope in the world and passion in the world without a plan is I think we're going to still fail. Regarding Métis, I know it's different from province to province and territory. Are there land rights that have been included from the Canadian government? Have you budgeted for health care for our Métis as well too, in terms of the status now that we're recognizing?
It's a great question, and I think that the Supreme Court decision is a new chapter for Canada. I practiced in a non-status town for a couple of weeks once, and to realize that those people had often been veterans that had to choose to give up their status in order to get veterans benefits, rather because they were more generous for their family than
Minister,
benefits. So
I just want to know. I've got a number of questions, and I know it's.
But the issue is, we have to go to the table and see what these people who now have rights, how do they want to exercise their rights?
So it hasn't been budgeted as of yet.
Well, there's no certainty that that will be required.
Okay. And my next question is regarding the friendship centers. You know, it's frustrating. Friendship centers are not just token centers within our communities. They deliver fundamental plans with whether it's safety, whether it is counseling, whether it is programs to help keep youth off the streets. And in my riding, you know it very well, we've got the highway tiers, a 724-kilometer stretch where over 30 women have gone missing or have been murdered. And friendship centers, whether they're in Prince George, Williams Lake, Kamloops, or across this country, they deliver core programs. And I am floored with the comments that were coming out that there is some concern. We've got some worries that the programs that aren't there. You held a session in Montreal on this. I just don't understand how this fits with your agenda of renewed relations with Indigenous peoples.
Just to explain, there's a difference between funding for the friendship centers, which is secure, and is that, but they, over the past 2 years, they have been administering the whole of the urban Aboriginal strategy. So at the moment, the National Association of Friendship Centers has the money booked, it's there, and they just have to sign their contribution agreement in order to get the money to flow.
All right. The next question I have is, again, with my riding. We have an alarming First Nations gang issue going on. We have asked a number of times on behalf of my riding that this government takes its focus from the urban areas and comes to the rural areas. And sometimes, and again, I'm glad that the cameras are on, Minister, because I think sometimes you do your best work, or the government does their best work when the cameras are on. Unfortunately, when the cameras are off and the media aren't watching, we still need help. We have a First Nations gang problem in Williams Lake. And I'm wondering, and I'm imploring you that if you will work with your colleagues, if you will come out to my riding to help us address this. The chiefs from our area, the Silcotin chiefs, have implored government to try and help find a solution with our provincial government. We need your help.
Well, and I think that on some of these issues around gangs, you know, I think the police chief in Prince Albert, with his Prince Albert in Saskatchewan, developed a hub model that really began to work and prevent people going into
And
gangs.
we're trying to work on the same thing. And again, I talked to you during the pre-inquiry meeting in Prince George, and I said, we are creating hope with no plan. And again, this program, whether it's the violence, the First Nations violence, it was spoke of at that day too, that this is all part of our truth and reconciliation. And truth and reconciliation has to go beyond just words.
As we know, hurt people hurt people. And one of the problems is that people who have had childhood trauma have had no hope in their lives, that it is a problem with addictions and with violence and eventually incarceration.
What are you going to do?
So we are going, that's why I think the crime prevention model, coming out of public safety, Project Venture, some of these things that have been absolutely shown to work.
Todd, we've got to finish up.
And you won't have to do this alone. We'll be with you.
It wasn't renewed, though.
Minister, I'm afraid we've got to move on.
What was it?
The project wasn't renewed for 2016.
What, Project Venture? We're working on it. It will. We are working very hard on programs that work. I believe that one works, and we're going to try and find the money for it.
Okay,
but it wasn't
thanks.
renewed.
Huh? Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Next question from Remy, please. Remy Messé.
Welcome, Minister, and thank you for meeting with us once again. I thank you for taking the time to do so. And I also thank your employees who are here, because I know it takes up a lot of work and time to prepare a meeting like this. I'm interested in education. The budget provides for $3.7 billion for First Nations education. I'm trying to make the correlation between the main estimates and the budget that we have before us. I'd like to know what the breakdown is for the monies that you have in your budget. $1 billion is for building schools, but 2.600, so over 5 years to improve education, the training of the students, and particularly
Is that, did I do that okay?
the literacy.
Special ed, we targeted, ciblé sur les questions.
We've targeted these very, very clearly for results.
But one of the things that's exciting right now is that there are a number of like-minded First Nations coming together to build school systems that will build their own training, professional development, accountability, student success programs. And so there's some money in there to encourage anybody who wants to come together to develop their own school system, because we know that that's what's going to work bottom up.
Merci.
Thank you. Some witnesses that we have met over the past few weeks have mentioned that there was a gap, a rather significant one, between education in each of the provinces and the education offered on reserves for First Nations. With these supplementary funds, your supplementary budgets, will they suffice to breach the gap that exists for First Nations? Unfortunately, some 39% of students, only 39% of students finish high school. It's a true tragedy for them, but also for Canada. To improve the accountability for success for the students is what is of highest importance. The injection of $2.6 billion is intended to improve the per capita, per child basis of education on the reserve. We aim to fill that gap and also to take other methods of helping the First Nations in terms of education. I would like to draw your attention to something that is quite specific. I'm from Gaspé, Amétis, Matapédia. We have 3 Mi'kmaq groupings there, and the majority, though, are Anglophones, and many of them go to New Brunswick for their education. Others on the reserve living on the Quebec side receive a certain amount of money to take their courses in New Brunswick, but there is a gap between what is supplied by Quebec versus what exists in New Brunswick. Because this is such a specific, peculiar case, I wonder what can be done to support people who are in that situation. Well, it's very interesting for them to have choices for the citizens of the First Nations. It is, but it is an issue for us to rectify this. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing this up.
Okay, thank you. The final question in the order for now is from Charlie. I guess it's a 3-minute question. Charlie, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Minister. Of course, you know I'd be talking to you about education. It's a very important issue. When we had the Indigenous Affairs spokespeople 2 weeks ago, I'd asked them at the Thunder Bay inquiry under oath, Indigenous Affairs representative said that there was no funding gap. So is that the position of the department, the funding gap between the provincial and the federal system? At the Thunder Bay inquiry,
yes,
Indigenous Affairs spokesman spoke under oath and said that there was no way to compare the federal and provincial per capita funding, and that there was essentially no funding gap between what students on reserve receive and what students in the provincial system. So is that the position of the department?
it's not mine.
So, well, I appreciate that.
So, no, I mean, there was a way of averaging things that if you add, some of the First Nations, the children go to the provincial school and therefore we pay that amount. So if you average it all together, but what I'm interested in is what is the per child investment on reserve and off reserve, and how do we get that equal without adding in what my department's paying to send kids to provincial school, paying that fee.
Okay, so when Shannon Kustashian left home at 13, if she stayed, she would have gotten $8,000 in funding. She had to live with my family, and the Indian Affairs paid $16,000 in the provincial system, so that was a 50%. The gap was enormous. So I want to just stick with these numbers with you, and again, excuse me with my grade 10 math. The Prime Minister promised $2.6 billion in core K-12 funding over 4 years. In the budget, it's over 5 years. So the next government actually delivers $800 million of that. So if we look at a 4-year number, we drop off $800 million. That puts us at about $1.8 billion over that 4 years. But I'm interested that $800 million is described as transformative, and that includes money to the Paul Martin Foundation. I have great respect for Paul Martin, but I don't know any other provincial system that pays outside agencies when it's supposed to be core funding. So I have 2 quick questions. One is are we going to have a legislative framework like the TRC has asked for with education and what the Auditor General has, so we can set some standards? And this transformative money, if it's not core funding, then what is it?
Please, just in 30 seconds, Minister.
The educators, I think, as they come together, are going to determine whether they themselves think a legislative framework would be helpful in terms of indicators, market. It may well be that it'll be the educational school systems themselves that will sort out and codify the standards. But I think that, and with the Paul Martin Initiative, I think the reason that the AFN asked for money to go there is because it has been transformative in those schools. The different, if you go to Hillside and see the teachers who say, I used to think I was a good teacher, I now know I'm a terrific teacher, and to be able to see those kids do so well in very short order, that is like the lighthouse schools, where then you end up with principals sharing across jurisdictions their best practices. And so I think in the results that have been demonstrated by the initiative, we want that to actually then be replicated in many more communities.
Thank you, Minister.
We've proven it works.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of the first round of questions, and I do have interest registered from a number of members to carry on with the questioning. So what I'd like to propose is that we continue the rotation. We'll start with the 7-minute questions again. And looking at the clock, we have room for 4 7-minute questions, which will take us to 5:15, and I think we should turn our minds to the vote at that point. So just to give a heads up to the committee members, the order then will be Mike Bosio, Kathy we switched. Gary Anandasangri, Kathy McLeod, Charlie Angus, and a Liberal to be named, Michael McLeod. Okay, thank you. So let's leap right into that with Gary Anandasangri, please.
Thank you, Minister. I do sincerely apologize for being late. I had another engagement I had to attend. I want to just pick up on what our friend was talking about. Can you outline, since taking office in November, the last 6 months, what kind of transformational change, at least in attitude and work plan, that you have implemented as the head of the department, as a minister?
Like, I mean, obviously the first thing that we were able to do was to launch the pre-inquiry in missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and I think that in itself, although maybe transformational would be too strong, I think that what we felt that after a decade of asking for an inquiry, that for the ministers to be coast to coast to coast listening to those families and knowing that they'd been heard was really important in resetting a relationship. That for us to be clear that there is an uneven application of justice, that the link between residential schools and child abuse and addictions and violence that has resulted in this. But I think that for us to have worked as hard as we did with all of our colleagues and with the finance minister to be able to do the kind of work it takes to get this kind of money in a budget is what our department really worked hard, because you can't fund a dream. You actually have to fund a plan. And I think that I can't thank the department enough for all the work they did, that to have these persuasive ways of getting money that would be acceptable to the finance department to be able to fund it.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to, several weeks ago we had the Office of the Correctional Investigator here, who shared with us some startling numbers with respect to incarceration. How do you feel that this budget will assist in addressing some of the structural challenges? So, for example, 25%, Canada has now surpassed 25% in terms of incarceration rates in prisons, 36% for women. So how does this budget help us in addressing some of those criminal justice issues and the inequitable numbers that we see in the criminal justice system?
This budget is very important in terms of particularly the money around education, the money around child welfare. There are some really significant things that will make a difference, that we know if people are successful and finish high school and go on to post-secondary, they are much less represented in prison. That when kids drop out because they didn't learn to read properly, that they get into trouble. And but my experience in prisons is that there's way too many Indigenous people there who shouldn't be there. And that this comes to the uneven application of justice or things like breaching conditions. I was in a prison in Winnipeg, in Headingley Prison, where almost prison for women, where when I asked what had most of these people done, all they'd done was breach their conditions. They hadn't been sentenced to jail in the first place. Yet the prison was full of people who had just breached their conditions, gone to administrative, and now not only are they in prison, but they're no longer with their children. And it which begets this generational thing. So we've, I think the correctional investigator has done a really important job, but it's also no place for people with mental health problems. This is, we've got that. We have got to help people get healthy again. And I think that with some of the drug courts and the Indigenous courts and some of the things that aren't in my ministry, but I am very keen, and the kind of money that is going to be required on with the health accord on healing and wellness. That's the way we're going to get there. But the money that I'm most proud of is the money for secure personal cultural identity. Investing in language and culture in these schools is how these kids feel good about themselves as proud Indigenous people in this country, and that is how they make healthy choices, good health, education, economic outcomes. And that's what all the kids have said to me, that they want to be on the land. They want to know their language and culture, and I think that it cannot be funded anymore as some fluffy extra if you've got time or money for it. It really is a core service that this government's committed to doing.
Thank you, Minister. I know Mr. Resnick spoke about we were in the north last week, and one of the places we visited was the courthouse in Thunder Bay, the first one, I believe, in Ontario that is that has a room that can resolve conflicts relating to Indigenous population. Now, what kind of programs or what kind of incentives are required so that the justice system itself as a whole systematically completely relooks at how we prosecute, how we sentence, how we investigate? Because I suspect that the numbers are very parallel if you look at the U.S. court system. The underlying discrimination that we've seen in many of the U.S. courts, I think, are very similar and can be transposed to our Indigenous population. So what can we do to ensure that we start some structural changes within our system?
Well, thank you for the question, and I was so inspired in British Columbia to meet Chief Bello from the Alkali First Nation, who is doing a restorative justice right in our own community in terms of people coming together with facilitation to know that you were harmed, I harmed you, what are we going to do to make this right? What would it feel, what would it take? In the Indigenous Court in New Westminster, Judge Buller Bennett, who is very clear about that so many of the people who come before her were harmed as children, and they didn't deserve to be harmed, and that she then is able to help them get on a good path by making sure they have a family doctor, make sure they can speak 5 words in their own language. These are the ways we're going to get people back on a good path, and coast to coast to coast on missing and murder, we've heard the criminal justice system is just not shaped to do this right now, and we've got to make a big change.
Thank you both. Next question to Kathy McLeod, please, Kathy.
Thank you. And I think I have 3 questions that I really hope to get answers for. So I'm going to give you all 3, and then hopefully we can work our way through them. I wasn't going to go here, but I have to go back to the First Nations Transparency Act. And I'm going to use 2 examples. If I was a citizen of Kamloops, There is nothing that prevents me from looking at Kelowna's audited statements and vice versa, or looking for Timmins, for example. I heard you talk about a passkey. So do you believe that, you know, a First Nations, a Soyuz band member shouldn't have access to maybe to Kamloops statements? And integrated with that is Bell Canada posts its shares, its report online, and so does TELUS. I went through a number of the statements that have been posted, and there is nowhere that I believe it would ever erode business interest. So I guess my first question is, and I am hearing from band members who are writing me and saying they are very uncomfortable that you have moved away from First Nations Transparency Act. And again, this is a basic level of transparency, whether it's Kelowna, Kamloops, Bell, TELUS, in terms of what is available, and truly sometimes the ability to make comparisons for a band member is important. So that's one. Number two, I'm glad to hear you talk about the Project Venture. I know I've had calls from the directors. It's been a very successful criminal prevention program, and they right now are very, very, very concerned that normally they've had operating money that's moved forward to them, and they're thinking they're going to have to collapse the program. I know it's not yours, but I just wanted to share that. My third area, and it does, I mean, when we supported murdered and missing Indigenous women, we also were very concerned that it would impact the delivery and support for on-the-ground prevention programs. So I want you to reassure me, because, you know, it appears that there's a decrease in the funding for the family violence prevention program. And so when I take, you know, the budget and the estimates and, you know, when I put everything into account, the former government gave approximately $12 million to support the work of the family violence prevention program. And we were hoping that would be matched or increased. The new budget is fairly murky in this area. There's $6.7 million per year over the next 5 years, and 3.5 to better support shelters. So it's very, very murky. So I think perhaps your officials might be wanting to sort of look and we'll at that piece. But most importantly, the first two.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the ones where there's, even though it looks like it's actually in the major increase column for me, because it goes, you know, it's a budget 2016 is another 73.6 and 24.8 in this year, but it is about extra money for shelters and what's that, 33.6 million over 5 years. So it is increasing, but we can get you the details on the breakdown if you like.
As I say, yeah. I mean, we did sort of estimates, budget, we broke it down, and to me it looked like a decrease, which was one of our concerns, that we're going to focus on the inquiry, but we would do that at the detriment of supporting some very important programs.
I couldn't agree more, and I know that Minister Haji is working very hard on a you know, a national strategy on violence against women, and obviously the Indigenous part of that is hugely important. But we that money is going to be there and increased.
So to go back to Kamloops
Project
versus
Venture,
Kelowna,
ever since I was in La Loche, I heard very strongly from the community that Project Venture was something that had been working there, and so we came back and spoke to Minister Goodale, and we're working hard to make sure that we want to fund programs that work, and those are that's very well received on the ground, and we're gonna figure this out.
Okay, so to be frank, the directors of the successful programs that I'm aware of are very, very concerned that they're not going to be funded again because they've had no indication. And so, I mean, of course, once you're into a new fiscal year, and I think it goes back to what Mike talked about at the beginning, is you might be given a 4-year program, but you're not given the 4 years funding. So it's a big concern.
Well, yes, and was the project venture that you knew, was that in the summer or was it delivered all year round or just during the school year? You know,
I believe
in your
it was
community?
a year-round. I believe, yeah.
What, yours was year-round as well? Okay. Okay, I want to know a little
back
bit
to
about
my
that.
favorite, because I truly, truly believe we are doing an incredible disservice to band members. And when you, again, I'll use my Kamloops Kelowna citizen, there is a basic level of transparency, accountability, the ability to compare, and I think we've done a huge disservice to band members when we have backed away, or we start to talk about you need a pass key to get into the information, or maybe the business information shouldn't be there. I would argue that the band members should have robust information about band business because they are a shareholder.
Yes, and I would agree with you that the objective is for chief and council to be accountable to their members, and that's where you and I disagree. And so this is about First Nations control over First Nations. They you know, some put it up on a website that's accessible to everybody, but some want it, you know, and are accountable just to their members.
So, you know, I'm sorry, Minister, I think we do a disservice. And again, it's for the band members. And how can you hold your chief and council? You might say that sounds outrageous, but then you go and look at perhaps what another band is doing and say, you know what, that is the norm, that is okay. So you do that with the councils. They compare themselves all the time. You do that. That is basic transparency, accountability, and it is truly a shame that community members will not have that information, and that the targets are like 70%. You're talking 25% of communities.
Kathy, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Really?
But on the upside, you get the last word, so that was good for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Charlie Angus, please.
Thank you. I just want to do some wrap up in terms of what we've already discussed. So in terms of the question on is there a funding gap between what is given to students in the provincial system and the federal system? That was the question that was asked at the Thunder Bay inquiry, and you said your opinion is that there is a funding gap. So is that the position of the department?
Yes, and again, the funding gaps are different depending on where you are. Like even if you talk to First Nations Education Steering Committee in British Columbia, the funding gap depends on a population too. How many special ed children, how remote is the community, but you know, if you were able to match a school on reserve with the same population, the same opportunities for the students, just meeting the gap may not be enough in certain ones. Some places we should be giving more because the kids are of greater needs, and that we should be able to offer extra things like homework clubs or the kinds of things that are really essential to student success.
Well, I certainly agree. I guess my concern is coming out of having been a provincial school trustee. The funding formula is how everything's done in education. No offense to the department, but it seems to be almost secret society. I can't seem to ever figure out, I could never get a straight answer as how the funding is done. It should be something that if you can look at it, then you know where the gaps are. Without knowing that, how do you do that? Would it be possible for you to supply our committee with just an overall view? Because I'm hearing even within the north region of Treaty 9, we seem to have real differences between what one school region is getting and what another is getting. So like I said, the difference between Nattawapiskat and Timmins Provincial Board is 8,000 to 16,000. In other areas, I hear, well, it's more like 10 to 14 or 11. So without those markers, we can't judge anything. Would it be possible to get? You don't have to give it to us now, and I'm not asking for you to.
But what I am happy to share with you, and we'll do it differently, is that when you look at the percentage finishing high school at Canada at 38% on reserve nationally, and non-Indigenous 86.8. These results are unacceptable, and we have to do whatever we can do to close the gaps in the outcomes. And it's going to mean spending the money wisely on the things that matter. And
you're preaching to the choir there, Madam Minister. So, but this is why we need the data. You cannot do anything without the data. So, I would like to ask you a question. When I see the priorities in planning, they talk about incremental improvements year after year. I've asked the department how do they base that, and they say, well, incremental improvements. But in Ontario region in 2013, we had like numeracy rates and literacy rates down at 18 and 21%. I mean, you don't have anything that low anywhere in the world except maybe sub-Saharan Africa. So that's probably our students in Treaty 9 who are not getting the support. So what are the markers then that we're going to identify other than hope that change is going to happen? Is it possible to see how we're going to get these things? What are the standards that you're going to use to make sure that we increase these abysmal rates?
So it's also even before school, right, Charlie, that even the readiness to learn when you hit the school system. So early learning and childcare also becomes part of student success. The place that I am really interested in is this making the jump from learning to read to reading to learn between grade 3 and grade 4. This we know that if kids don't make that jump, they will fake it till grade 8, grade 9, grade 10 when they drop out. And so we do need evidence-based approaches and to finding the kids that are struggling and be able to wrap around the services to help them be successful.
Okay, so that's why I want to ask you about the legislative approach. The Auditor General in 2004 said Indian Affairs had done a brutally bad job. 2011, it was even worse. And how is it possible if you spend that much money that you could have worse outcomes? And they said we need a legislative approach. The government's committed to it through the TRC, but when we talked earlier, you said, well, you're going to talk to the educators and see what they want. I mean, like, how do we get legislation if we're going to see, you know, there's an isolated one-off school here, and then there's a proper big board down there that's already doing their own thing? Like, without legislation, we don't have any way of establishing these markers. So how are we going to get that in the timely way that we're not going to lose another generation?
And what, there's two kinds of legislation. So would the legislation be around the funding formulas, Charlie, or would it be around measuring and achieving outcomes?
Well, you need them both, right? Yeah. Because the problem is in the provincial systems we have ring fencing, so the department can't move money from a school and fix a bridge, right? That's one of the reasons we have such great public education, but that doesn't exist in the department. So without legislation, without ring fencing, when you leave this department and we get the next Indigenous Affairs Minister who may be further down the rung in terms of quality, who knows what's going to happen with the money, right? So that's why you need a legislative ring fencing approach, that what you leave here is something that cannot be touched, because money, you know, Carolyn, the money is taken all the time and moved elsewhere and not spent, and that's where these outcomes are failing. So that's why, is there going to be a legislative response so that this money is going where it's needed, and it's going to the classroom, it's going to textbooks, it's going to buildings, it's going to outcomes?
And I think the Auditor General was also pretty clear that it was a lack of money, too. I mean, and so we're very keen to be accountable for the results as we go forward. We have to have these kids doing better, and that we're interested in looking at how we ensure that. But as you know, as we move to getting people out from under the Indian Act and move it to self-government, or move it to school systems that are accountable for results, then I think that we can figure out what does that look like, and be able to shape, if there is a need for legislation around that kind of flexibility and understanding that first, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to First Nations, because some of these kids are in the provincial school system. How can I control whether they're getting language and culture properly when we know that's part of their success. And so if they're in a provincial system. So I want to make sure the money's in the system with great teachers. And like Finland, I want kids to grow up and want to be a teacher.
Thank you, Minister.
And then we're going to win.
Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to have our final question before we move to the votes, but I just want to let the committee members know that I've got business in the House that I have to leave committee early for. I'll be leaving at 5:50. Not just yet, Charlie, but I'm going to after. You really do. We all appreciate your enthusiasm. I'm going to just wait. I'm just going to leave after Michael finishes his question, and then Charlie will take over the chair. Thank you, Michael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to say I, for one, really, and I think a lot of people in the North, for sure, and probably across Canada, our Aboriginal populations applaud that the Transparency Act was gone. I've worked with many companies in the Northwest Territories, companies that Aboriginal band councils had shares in, and this act tripped us up nonstop. Every affiliate that the council had a share in had to disclose its revenues. The competition saw it. The potential partners walked away because they didn't want to be involved with companies or band council projects that had them also have to disclose. It was not a good act. It goes against the principle of own source revenue generation. We're trying to create healthy communities. We're trying to create independent communities, and this doesn't help it. It flies in the face of the concept of nation to nation, and I'm glad it's gone. On the Nutrition North review, I'm hoping that we're taking a holistic approach on how we move forward on that front. I still think, and I've mentioned this before, so it's not going to be a surprise, that we need to pull in the Department of Transportation to take a look at the size of the runways in our smaller Aboriginal communities. We have runways that are just short of the length that is needed to allow the larger cargo planes to land. So we got planes landing with half a load. We have planes landing with half of the population, or half of the number of seats filled. I, in my campaign, witnessed some communities where people had to wait. The plane landed with 18 seats, only 9 people could get on. I think if we're going to make a change, then we have to include looking at other things, not only the subsidy. A $60 million subsidy is one thing that's going to go ongoing forever, but if we change length of runways, if we start building roads, we're going to eliminate that subsidy. We also have to be including community gardens and local wild foods. Those things should be part of the review or a part of the consideration as we move forward. So maybe I could ask you if you could talk to those points, if you would.
And I mean, I hear you about the runways, and I think it's something that we need to look at, absolutely. And I think the country food is something that I've heard again in the North, that people want to be able to feed their families, but with climate change, that, it's just more expensive to get out to where they can hunt, and more expensive in terms of so many ways of the abundance of the fish up north. There's no excuse for kids to be hungry. And so that's going to be an ongoing conversation about how we really fix this program such that there's no hungry kids, and how we actually, that hunters and fishermen can actually be proud again feeding their families.
I also wanted to just talk quickly about where you're going with some of the support for the programs that are kind of Aboriginal based in the North. We have Dichinta that offers programs, education programs to youth, and we also have Foxy's that has a health program for young female. We have the Boreal Guardian program that is on the environmental side, that they could provide monitoring in that area. We have the Aboriginal Head Start that I don't know, I don't think you can speak to it, but why is it in health and not in your department? It doesn't make sense. And why do we still have Aboriginal programs such as Canor that don't cater to certain populations of Aboriginal people? More specifically, the Métis are not allowed to apply. So maybe we could talk quickly on some of these things that
I think that we want I mean, it's the reason why members of parliament and committees can really have their ears to the ground and hear about the programs that work and find out about the ones that really don't. And we want that kind of feedback. And so if there's good programs that you think we can work with colleagues in other departments or other levels of government, then we should do that. When Aboriginal Head Start almost came to our department, when I was Minister of Public Health, it was about to be moved when our government fell. So this was a tough conversation 10 years ago, but it's an interesting question. But you know, I sort of remain a Minister of Social Determinants of Health, but I am interested in your observations. That Aboriginal Head Start in Yellowknife is one I'll never forget the visit to there in terms of what they do with those children with such challenges.
My final question is on the opportunities for jobs in our communities. I come from a community that has a little over 60% unemployment, and we've been in that situation for many years. And that's just the adults. The youth the percentages are even higher. And as we move forward and try to encourage youth to stay in school and do a lot of things on their own, I think it's our responsibility to, first of all, provide opportunity as political people that make these decisions. But it's also our opportunity, our responsibility to make sure they learn how to work. Summer jobs is a really important part of growing up. We don't have a whole lot of opportunity on that front. I'm hoping that the labor market opportunities that you talked about is going to be delivered in the Northwest Territories and in our communities also.
Yes, and I think also Minister Mahaichuk's very interested in this. I think we do really believe that summer jobs is just this tremendous experience, and as well as contacts and confidence and leadership, and so yeah, I'd love to work with you on that.
Yeah, well, there's 20 seconds if you can make use of it. Okay, well, I think we're good. Thank you very much for the questions, and Minister, thank you very much to you and your colleagues for the testimony today and the wonderful information. I'm going to step out of the chair's seat, and Charlie Angus will step in, and Charlie will run the vote.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll get back to you on the things that the committee asked for.
Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Don't get us in trouble.
You're letting an anarchist have the chair?
Your script is here.
Yeah. We are still in session, so please take your seats. Yeah, I'm being extra nice. Mr. Doherty, please take your seat. We are on camera, not in camera. So I just we're on camera. That's okay? That's okay? Okay, so right now our job is pursuant to Standing Order 81-4. We will now dispose of the main estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2017, minus the interim estimates that the House agreed to on March 21st, 2016. So I'll ask, do we have a unanimous consent to deal with all the votes in one motion? Yes? Okay. So then the question I put to the committee is, shall all the votes under the Indian Affairs and Northern Development of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station of the main estimates 2016-2017 carry? On division? And shall I report these votes to the House?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's it?
Charlie, way to go, Charlie.
Okay, let's go.